Thanks very much, Deanne. If there's one thing that I've observed in the 24 years since I set up my first MDA service, if I knew then what I know now, believe me, it is the professionalisation of the portfolio management function, the portfolio building function, aligned to, as part of, within advice businesses. And it's been absolutely central to the development of managed accounts that the portfolio management function, the decisions about how portfolios are built and what goes into them and the objectives that they have, it's been absolutely central to that process that advice firms have wanted to be closer and closer to that process. It hasn't been the way it used to be, where an advisor picked stuff off the shelf done by somebody else. And so it's a pleasure for me to be joined today by Chris Wellerton, the CIO of Acambo, and Jeff Mitchell, the CIO of Infocus, to talk about how they, in their businesses, have built the portfolio management function, what it does, what they look to achieve, and then for us to talk about some of the challenges which we see in the environment that we operate in today. So I'm going to invite Jeff and Chris to start off by talking a little about what it is they do and how they approach this process. So, Jeff, shall we start with you?
Okay, looks good. Good afternoon, everyone. So for us, in Infocus, the investment management business is called Alpha Investment Management, so I'll talk in that frame. So essentially we are running managed accounts and managed funds for a cohort of clients that extends from essentially mass market through to high net worth. So we're running managed funds, managed accounts on 6 platforms at the moment, so we get that crossover between diversified portfolios on the fund side. That feeds into diversified portfolios to managed accounts, a direct share, and then again the same replicated out on First Choice, which is a bit of a different build suite. So we've been doing it here since 2019 was the launch here, and then prior to that I was doing managed accounts at another entity. So basically I've had 10 years on the tools doing managed accounts, probably the best part of 20 years on the investment side. So that sort of brings us to this point in time, which is a really interesting juncture. I think the timing, Toby, of this event is pretty well bang on when you're looking for stress events in the market and our operating environment.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. Chris, talk about Acambo and your own background and the business.
Yep. Thanks, Toby, and thanks for slotting us on a Friday afternoon between a discussion around private credit and AFCA, what can go wrong. So I don't know whether we're here to buffer the conversation between two sensitive topics or we're in the naughty corner. But no, a big fan of Frank and the MA guys. We're big supporters of their business, and they've got a very strong and a rigorous risk management framework. So we like working with MA. So Acambo provides investment management services. We design, manage and govern investment portfolios, mainly through managed account solutions, SMA, MDA solutions. And alongside this, Vertex Investment Services is our affiliated consulting partner. And Vertex is responsible for the building a philosophy and framework around investment solutions and working hand in glove with Acambo and other investment managers to build appropriate solutions. And the distinction's important. The demarcation of roles is important. I think in an industry that's, let's just say that there's a lot of talk and a lot of focus on conflicts at the moment. But what we effectively offer is an end-to-end solution from construction of investment framework, philosophy, etc., through to a robust and scalable management and implementation of investment solutions.
Now, I asked both of you to participate in this discussion because both of your portfolio management businesses are closely associated with and have grown out of advice organisations. So talk a little about that sort of either the synergies or the tensions, the way in which an advice arm and a portfolio management arm work together.
It's been an interesting evolution, and I think it's something that everybody thinks about. The way we've come at it is essentially, and I'll talk about from the context of a mass market to mass affluent. Pretty well everyone's come up through the world of model portfolios. That's been essentially the stock and trade of advice for ever since the turn of the century, and if not before that as well. So from the advice side, what was essentially happening is you had a business that was running a model suite, and everyone's familiar with the dealer groups and how you have a research function in the dealer group, and they tend to build out the model suite, and that then permeates through the dealer group. Doesn't mean it's right across the dealer group. Advisors of different skill levels, different client types build for their end client. But with the evolution of asset management was actually a way of, you can sort of see the evolution coming from the dealer group moving into, we actually want to do the model portfolios better, we need better governance, better manager selection, better outcomes for the clients. So the internal research function started to build to produce that in models. And then with the advent of managed accounts becoming more broader and adoption, it was a natural step to go, well, if this is what we're doing in a model, then if we industrialise that model, we end up with a managed account. And that's essentially that pathway that InFocus has taken from that model through into managed accounts and into managed funds. So that's essentially how we got there. And of course, in this world, at an advisory level, the role is to compare products to provide advice to clients. So even internally, we're always competing with external providers of managed accounts in that positioning and portfolio construction on behalf of advisors, which then turns around. It's like there's no point of easy wins because you're constantly being compared to others, like Chris, for example. And I think that's sort of the evolution as to how we got to where we are. And it's having that scale initially to go, actually, we've actually got enough funds under advice that we can resource up adequately a research and investment function that we can bring to work in the dealer group, because essentially what's different from us to someone else is we know the advisors in the dealer group, we know how the portfolios are built, and it's not just about the product, it's how you support the provision of advice. That's much more of a partnership model and a transactional model internally.
Yeah. Chris, Acambo's been quite acquisitive over recent years. First Financial, YX Ball, Whittle & Scott, others I'm sure I don't know of. So given that they came together as part of an advice group, how's the portfolio management process been applied to groups that advice organisations that started from different places?
Well, just to go back a step, the Acambo business is a dedicated asset management business, but it was born out of advice. And all of the founders were advisors. So we have a strong pedigree in advice and understanding some of the issues that advisors face and the challenges of being an advisor in an industry where there's an intensification of regulatory scrutiny and compliance. And as we built out the Acambo business, we identified the need to scale up our solutions, and that's where we went on the path of managed account solutions. And we built a very strong infrastructure across a number of platforms to offer those solutions at scale. And then we merged with an advice business called First Financial 4 years ago. And First Financial was seeking a managed account solution, and this is the important bit. They were seeking a managed account solution that was tailored around their distinct philosophy. And they needed an asset manager who could build solutions that catered to their distinct philosophy. So as we worked closely with them to build that out, we identified that there were other groups who were also seeking not so much a distinct philosophy, but scalable, systemised, well-governed managed account solutions with a track record too. Because, as you know, you can't go to a platform now and just want to be a startup managed account or portfolio manager. You've got to have a track record. You've got to have a pedigree. You've got to be well resourced. So that's our journey towards becoming a standalone asset manager that serves effectively advice groups that are aligned with us.
So picking up on that resource point, because Jeff made it as well, let's talk about the resources that each of you bring now to a portfolio management business. Number of people and their background and what they're doing.
Yeah, Toby. So from our perspective, we're essentially a team of 7, and in that team of 7, we're also got appointed an external asset consultant. Well, our board has appointed an external asset consultant to keep an eye over what we're doing, and essentially that is compliance to policy. So we've got the governance structure comes from the board all the way down. The board is particularly aware of what's going on in our governance environment, and that role in terms of looking at governance is expanded when it comes to the day-to-day. We're actually running managed funds globally, so it's not fund of funds. We're actually selecting the underlying securities that go in and build managed funds. So we've got a very quantitative driven process. We're not a huge team, so quants are a very big part of the process we bring. But it's then essentially having a chassis, if you like, with your capital markets, and then your processes roll through that chassis, and then coming off the chassis, you get the products that come through. So there's a heavy use of quant. The other side of it is there's a number of us in the team that have been probably around the industry for too long and are hard-bitten cynics. So when it comes to needing to do fundamental analysis on other strategies, looking into governance structures around whatever we might be using, exchange-traded funds or managed funds, that fundamental aspect comes into it as well. But essentially, we look to do as much as we can with the data. And the feedback loop on there is if you're not getting it right with the data, the performance won't come through. So that's always our big check around the process. Is the process running compliant, and is it producing the returns we expect it to? So it's bringing the resources to bear on the process, and I think resourcing is a really big challenge. Finding the right blend of people, and the other part of it's technology. Bringing that and harnessing it together. I think everybody in the room's witnessed the massive ramp up in the adoption of artificial intelligence in the last 2 years. That's really fed a lot into what we're doing and how we incorporate and use artificial intelligence, what you can use it for, what you don't use it for. So it's very much trying to stay abreast of having the right people, having the right technology, making sure that you're using the technology right, and then always having that bit of capacity, resource, and go, if something new happens, can we pivot? Can we have the time and resources to go, actually, this is new? And artificial intelligence was a classic case, how we engage with that. So and you're constantly looking at it. Your team, not that your team's never fixed, but every day brings a new challenge.
So if you're in Jeff's team, don't worry, he is watching.
No, I wouldn't let him come, don't worry. But yeah, you get the feel.
Yeah. And what about the Acambo team, Chris? Number of people, what they do, and the sort of external resources that you bring or that you use?
Yeah, I mean, we've got 15 in the investment team, and amongst those there's 10 portfolio managers. And so we bring a strong institutional grade framework to our investment solutions. One of the great things about our business is the long tenure that a lot of them have in the business, but also in the industry. You know, there's an average amongst those 10 PMs, there's an average tenure in the industry of 30 plus years. So a lot of grey hairs, a few no hairs. So it's, and most of us have got an advice background as well. So we've got a strong understanding of, you know, as I said before, about the conundrums of providing advice and the needs of advice solutions. We probably about 8 or 9 months ago, we identified the opportunity with AI. Everyone talks about the efficiencies of AI, but I think a lot of it's just a lot of throwaway lines and just helping take minutes of meetings and summarise articles. But a couple of the guys in the team were given the task of finding out how we could deploy AI solutions in our business to provide genuine productive solutions and enhance our scalability. Whilst also keeping their jobs at the same time. And they came back a few months later and gave me a big bill from Anthropic to sign up to Claude. And I gritted the teeth and we paid it and we signed it. And they've, I won't say revolutionised just yet, but they've changed a lot of our processes. They've brought an enormous robustness to our investment rigour, and they've added a degree of strength and depth that would be the equivalent of adding several new investment managers to the team. So that's been critical for us to see how that's evolved as well. It's also enabled us to build some stronger risk management systems as well. Our data interrogation, our data collection has been a lot stronger through those AI solutions. So that's really propelled us forward over the last 6 or 8 months.
What about external resources, Jeff talked about engaging an asset consultant. I mean, does a Cambo have a relationship with a Mercer or a Jana or a Morningstar other than as a data provider?
No. I mean, we use a lot of available resources, such as a lot of systems and software, and we've got a couple of Bloombergs and several fact sets, and Morningstar direct subscriptions, things like that. We don't engage directly the services of an asset consultant. We have an affiliated asset consulting business, which will be providing those services to advice groups. But we do lean on, I've mentioned partnerships a few times. We do lean on a lot of our partners, like MA and various other investment managers that we use, and we pick their brains. We use them for whatever we can to extract their IP, and we get a lot of the intel from them. As I mentioned, the experience in the team and the systems that we use, we're pretty well equipped to build our own framework.
Okay, so I want to come back to the conflicts issue before we close, because it's such an important issue, and I want to kind of, draw back the veil and sort of look at it, pretty objectively. But let's start off by let's go to talking about how you see the sort of state of the managed account market now. Where are we at this time?
Well, in terms of conflict?
Well, no, just in terms of the sort of adoption by advisors. There, you referred to the options that advisors have to use others, Chris or BlackRock or whatever. So presumably the alpha portfolios aren't mandatory. So the sort of the pressure you feel from your advisors and where you think the managed account market is at this time.
Oh, okay. So not a long answer at all. What we're seeing that managed accounts, and clearly everybody knows, have reached a critical mass. And I think it's probably sometime in the last 3 years, managed accounts really became the mainstream for mass affluent advisors in the retail market. So we saw from the position of, I'm a managed account manager, here's my product, here's other managed accounts, pick the one you like, to being a advisors recognising that, well, we've got a model portfolio, or my practice has got a model portfolio, it's of sufficient scale. Make my model portfolio a managed account and let me liberate the efficiencies from doing that. And the next step, I think, has become, because of, and we'll talk about the regulatory framework a bit, but because scale, what is threshold scale for a managed account now, has changed materially in the last 3 or 4 years, changed materially in the last 2 years. That option's starting to close unless you've got sufficient funds. So now it's moving more into MDA, IMA space, smaller portfolios, but still looking for that specialisation in portfolio construction. So I think that's the sort of point we're on right now, as to whether someone in a practice goes, well, we'll be part of this separately managed account, or we'll do an MDA because we actually want that increased specialisation because we're a special case, or the client type, whatever. We're into that space at the moment. So on that's the client-facing, advisor-facing piece. At the back end, and in the context of conflict, we still don't know where ASIC is with the managed account review. We're all sweating on that one to see what happens there. So we just park that. But the scale for running a managed account now is different significantly to what it was. To Chris's point before, you are not going to get a gig with a platform, because remember, a managed account is the platform's product. Might have my name on it. It's their product. So they get to set the hurdles and the thresholds.
Other than in an MDA structure.
Other than in
Thank you. Yeah, that's right. Chris, you talked about running both SMAs and MDAs. How many portfolios or models or mandates do you think you run? And do you want to pick up on this issue of the differences between SMAs and MDAs for you?
Yeah, I mean, we've got across half a dozen platforms. There's over 100 different portfolios that we run, but there's effectively, you've got your parent and child structures. So we've got an Aussie large cap portfolio, an Aussie small cap, a global portfolio that we run, and some fixed income portfolios, and they feed into a range of multi-asset solutions across a range of platforms. So there's a lot of I guess institutional grunt and operational firepower in order to be able to do that, and do that to scale, and do that consistently with and delivering on performance as well. But to pick up on your points about where managed accounts are at, and also about the compliance piece, I'll put the compliance piece second. The last year or two, there's been a huge focus, with Shield and First Guardian, a huge focus on compliance, governance, etc. So there's been a few things. Firstly, I think there's been a breakdown in trust, because where you once might have trusted ratings agencies, platforms to do their work and to do their due diligence, we've seen that there's some failures from time to time, and it just means that there's been a greater sense of accountability for the role of each party in ensuring that they're covering their own backside, and they're doing their job, and they're doing the extra work. And what that's meant is that the standards of compliance, regulatory scrutiny, the expectations from platforms have changed significantly, and they've lifted significantly. And this is all happening at a time where that's driving up costs of compliance, but there's more fee pressure. There's fee pressure everywhere. And it feeds into Jeff's point about the need for scale, the importance of scale. So when platforms are asking for institutional grade investment solutions, you need to be able to have scale to be able to provide those.
Well, let's talk about this issue of conflicts, because it's clearly ASIC's. In fact, ASIC said in their corporate statement that we're going to examine managed accounts, by which they actually meant SMAs, and we're going to look at. I forget the first point. Management of conflicts was the second, and outcomes for clients was the third. So, what conflicts are you conscious of in the way you approach managed accounts? What conflicts do you think about? and how do you address those?
Look, it's a great question, and when addressing conflicts, I think you've got to start with the end in mind. So, essentially, I work in a business that the holding company owns an advice business and owns an asset management business, and we work across that. The main conflict that we're dealing with through the advice process is conflicted remuneration. So, keeping the lines of remuneration clear, and making sure that when money is moving, that there is actually a transaction. There is a service being provided for the transfer of those funds, where the client's involved, where that dollar flows and how it flows through the business and where it lands. Knowing where that is critical, because I know we get. Just for example, if we're going to a platform to bring a new product to life on a platform, the first questionnaire we get will be somewhere between 11 and 15 pages to deal specifically with conflict. Because if you can't get through that questionnaire, there's no point in doing the next one. So for us, it's about making sure that where the client is paying, that they are actually getting value for what they're paying for, and that the advisor's remuneration is for advice for what they're paying for, so that even if we were completely unrelated partners, the flow of money wouldn't be any different. And then it's looking at where does the benefit flow ultimately, and to Chris's point, there's a lot of price pressure out there. It's just naturally the competitive environment. But there's no free kicks on fees. It's all completely transparent. So there's the natural competition in the market for those points that you're dealing with. But the potential for conflict, when I look at our business, there is a potential for conflict pretty well right through the business. Is the client necessarily disadvantaged because of that? That's always the big question that we're dealing with.
Yeah. Chris, how do you think about conflicts and identifying them and I use the word addressing rather than managing because it's got a particular meaning. So
yeah. Before I touch on conflicts, if I can, I didn't answer your question about the MDA SMA distinction.
Right. Yes.
Before, but the one thing that we've noticed, and obviously the growth in managed accounts over the last decade or two has been phenomenal, but within excess of 250 billion in managed accounts. And a wise man said to me a year or two ago that SMAs have driven a lot of that, but MDAs will be the next phase of this. Might have been you, Toby.
Yeah.
MDAs
could have been.
MDAs will be the next phase of this because of the need from advisors and clients for customisation and flexibility, and we're now seeing a lot of that come through. So that's something that's come to the fore for us over the last 12 months. There's a greater interest in more flexibility, which I feel like it's the next evolution of managed accounts.
Yeah.
In terms of conflicts, I mean, there's always been conflicts in the industry. There always will be. Obviously we know it's a case of identifying them and then managing them. And in some ways you could say that, and I think a lot of it comes down to the blurring of roles. And to that end, in some ways, one of the biggest conflicts for a long time has been the fact that an advisor has been a relationship manager, an investment strategist, a personal advice strategist, and a fund selector. And there's a lot of conflict through that process.
And a businessman trying to create efficiency within their own business. And so the tension between doing something and doing nothing is actually is a little recognised conflict that managed accounts have looked to address. I can do something, I can do something in a way that's that works for the relationship with the client.
Yeah, absolutely. So in many ways, we see our role as taking away a lot of that conflict by making a clearer demarcation or creating a clearer demarcation of roles between who's providing the advice, who's doing the investments, and then having all parties measured and having the appropriate governance frameworks in place. When we talk about the appropriate governance frameworks, and this is where platforms are red hot, and they'll often point you in the right direction as to what you need to do to ensure that you're upholding the standards. Because, as Jeff said before, I mean, with SMAs, it's their product. So they need to know it's going to cut the mustard. So they'll make sure that you're upholding the standards that are at their level, and they've got ASIC breathing down their neck at the moment as well. So they're jumping even higher. So we're held to account by advisors, by clients, by platforms, by other parties we deal with, and then we've got performance standards to uphold as well. So how do we manage the conflict? By ticking all the boxes and making sure we're doing what the platforms tell us to, and being clear on our roles and the role of the advisor and the role of the asset consultant.
Now, are there questions for Jeff or Chris? This is your opportunity to ask two extremely experienced professionals. Why am I not in your portfolio? No. Okay, so as you see your businesses, Alpha and Infocus, Acambo, and the broader group developing, are you looking ahead? What does success look like? For each of you, or each of your businesses.
Look, for us, success will be being able to maintain and lead the client experience of advisors' advice and playing the role in that through delivering good and cogent investment experience. It sounds glib, but we live in an ever-changing world, and part of that is what the standard is today is not what the standard will be in 2 or 3 years' time. Think about what the standard was 3 years ago and compare what's happening today to where it was 3 years ago. And I guess Chris and I are working at the coalface, and it's changed materially in 3 years, but providing, and particularly with the younger generation coming through, they are demanding more immediate reporting, more direct experience, better engagement with not only the advice but also with their capital, more transparency of reporting, attribution analysis that's coming through. That's what the platforms are demanding, more and more of that. So the standard of what is expected is going up, and it's staying still is going to require running quite quickly in that space because the standard is rising quickly. So success for us will to continue to be in that space and hopefully be part of the thought leadership that takes it to the next level.
Chris?
Look, it sounds a little bit simple, but I think happy advisors and happy clients is success for us. We pride ourselves on having long-term relationships. If we maintain long-term relationships, that's success. If we're able to help advice groups and advisors, particularly advice groups, remove key person risk, bring in more simplicity to their business, and help them with scalable solutions, then that's success. And also with commercial sustainability as well, because there's a greater investment required, with compliance, systems, technology, etc.
Yeah, great. Look, please join with me in thanking Jeff Mitchell, Chris Willerton for what I think has been a very insightful view into what it takes to create a portfolio management arm or business within a broader advice business. Thanks, guys.